I should have known something was wrong when my own daughter started treating me like I couldn't tie my shoes. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 58, I was living pretty comfortably in Portland, Oregon. My husband, Robert, left me well taken care of when he passed 18 months ago. $900,000 in savings, plus his military pension. Not rich, but comfortable enough that I never had to worry about paying bills or buying groceries. Rebecca, my 34-year-old daughter, had always been the responsible one. She's a financial consultant, smart as a whip, and after her father died, she stepped up to help me navigate all the paperwork that comes with losing a spouse. I was grateful. Grief makes you foggy, and I'll admit I wasn't thinking clearly those first few months. But then came the lunch that changed everything. We were at Olive Garden, Rebecca's choice, not mine, because apparently I needed familiar environments now. I had just finished telling her about my morning at the mall when I paused mid-sentence. "Wait, where did I park?" I laughed, looking around the restaurant like my car might materialize. I always forget in those huge lots. Rebecca didn't laugh. She set down her fork and gave me that look, the one you give a child who just broke something valuable. "Mom, this is the third time this month you've mentioned forgetting where you parked." The table went quiet. My sister Janet stopped mid-bite. Rebecca's husband Mike shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should talk about this," Rebecca continued, her voice getting that professional tone she uses with clients. "These little episodes are adding up. Episodes. Like I was having medical episodes because I couldn't remember a parking spot in a sea of identical cars." I wanted to say something sharp back, but everyone was staring at me with those concerned expressions. You know the ones, where people tilt their heads slightly and lower their voices like you might shatter if they speak too loud. "I'm fine," I said quietly, suddenly feeling very small in that big restaurant booth. "Of course you are," Rebecca said, reaching over to pat my hand. "But Dad's death was traumatic. It's natural for stress to affect memory. Maybe I should help you with some of the financial stuff for a while, just until you're feeling more like yourself." It sounded reasonable. It sounded caring. It sounded like exactly what a loving daughter would offer. That's how good she was at this. I agreed because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, because I thought she was trying to help. Looking back now, I can see it was the moment she began stealing my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, I just thought I was lucky to have such a caring daughter who wanted to help her grieving mother. I had no idea I was actually prey, and she was a predator who had been planning this for months. The waiter brought our check, and Rebecca immediately grabbed it. "I've got this, Mom," she said. "Save your energy for more important things." More important things. As if buying my own lunch had become too complicated for my allegedly failing brain. I should have grabbed that check back. I should have told her exactly what I thought about her episodes comment. Instead, I sat there and let her pay, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I was losing it. That's the thing about emotional manipulation. It works because it makes you doubt yourself. And Rebecca was just getting started. Within 2 weeks, Rebecca had appointed herself the manager of my entire existence. It started small. She'd call every morning just to check in, and somehow always found something to worry about. Did I remember to take my vitamins? Had I paid the electric bill? Was I eating enough vegetables? The questions felt caring at first, but they came with an undertone that suggested I probably hadn't done any of these things correctly. "Mom, I noticed you bought groceries yesterday," she said during one of these calls. "But you got the store brand instead of your usual. Are you feeling confused about products now?" I stared at the generic cereal box on my counter. "Rebecca, it's cereal. I bought it because it was $3 cheaper." "Right, but you've always been particular about brands. It's just different." Different. Another word that was apparently code for mentally declining. The worst part was how she shared these concerns with other people. I started noticing relatives and family friends giving me those careful, pitying looks. At church, Mrs. Davidson asked how I was holding up, in a tone that suggested I might be holding up poorly. When I asked Rebecca about it, she looked genuinely surprised. "I haven't said anything specific, Mom, just that you've been struggling since Dad passed. People care about you. They want to help." Struggling. As if grief was a character flaw. But the real power move came when she suggested we organize my finances together. "I know you've been handling money just fine," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of papers. "But there's so much paperwork after Dad's death. Beneficiary forms, account updates, tax implications. Let me help you sort through it. She was right about the paperwork. There was a lot of it. And she was a financial consultant after all. It made sense to accept her help. We should probably add my name to your accounts, she suggested casually. Just for convenience, so I can help with transfers and payments without having to bother you every time. Is that necessary? It's just temporary, until all the estate stuff is settled. Lots of families do this. She smiled warmly. It'll actually give you more freedom. I can handle the boring money stuff, and you can focus on taking care of yourself. I signed the papers because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, and daughters don't steal from their mothers, or so I thought. The first sign something was wrong came 2 weeks later at the bank. I wanted to transfer $5,000 to my church's building fund, something I'd done every year for the past decade. Mrs. Thompson, the teller said, after typing for several minutes, I'll need to verify this transaction with Rebecca. Verify with Rebecca? Why? The young man looked uncomfortable. She left instructions that any transfers over a certain amount should be approved by her first. For your protection. For my protection. Like I was a child who might accidentally give my college fund to a Nigerian prince. I stood there while he called my daughter to ask permission for me to spend my own money. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. When Rebecca answered, I could hear her professional voice through the phone. Oh yes, Mom mentioned wanting to make a donation. That's fine, but let's keep it to $2,000 instead of $5,000. She's been a bit generous lately, and we're trying to maintain her budget. My budget. That she had apparently created without consulting me. I left the bank with a check for $2,000 instead of $5,000, feeling like a teenager whose parents had just cut their allowance. That night I called Rebecca. Honey, what's this about requiring approval for my transactions? Mom, remember? We talked about this. You signed the papers giving me oversight for large purchases. It's just temporary protection while you're grieving. I don't remember agreeing to that. There was a pause. We discussed it when you signed the bank forms. You said it sounded smart. Had I said that? The weeks after Robert's death were still fuzzy. Maybe I had agreed to something I didn't fully understand. But $5,000 isn't that much money, I protested. Mom, you've donated $15,000 to various causes in the past 3 months. That's not normal for you. $15,000? That seemed high. But maybe she was right. Maybe I had been more generous than usual. Grief makes you do strange things. I'm just trying to protect you, Rebecca continued, from yourself and from people who might take advantage of your emotional state. The irony of that statement would hit me much later. For now, I just felt confused and embarrassed. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly. Okay, I said quietly. I understand. I love you, Mom. I'm only doing this because I care. I believed her. God help me. I actually believed her. By month 3 of Rebecca's temporary help, I was living on an allowance like a college freshman. She'd moved most of my money into what she called protected accounts, ones I couldn't access without her permission. I got $500 a month transferred to a checking account for daily expenses. It's more than enough for groceries and basic needs, she explained when I questioned the amount. And this way, you don't have to worry about managing large amounts of money while you're still processing grief. $500 for a woman who used to donate more than that monthly to charity. But here's the twisted part. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, like managing money was this huge burden she was graciously lifting from my shoulders. The real wake-up call came when I tried to buy a birthday present for my grandson Tommy. He was turning 10, and I wanted to get him something special, a bike I'd seen at the sporting goods store for $300. My card was declined. I stood at the register, feeling heat creep up my neck as the teenage cashier ran my card 3 more times. Each beep of rejection felt like a slap. Maybe try calling your bank? The kid suggested helpfully. I called Rebecca instead, stepping outside into the parking lot. Mom, you've already spent your monthly allowance, she said, and I could hear keyboard clicking in the background like this was just another business call. Allowance? Rebecca, I'm 58 years old. Budget, sorry. Look, you spent $200 on groceries, $150 on that church luncheon donation, and a bunch of little purchases that added up. You can't just keep spending without thinking. It's a bike for Tommy's birthday. Get him something smaller. Kids don't need expensive gifts. Something smaller. For my only grandson's 10th birthday. Rebecca, this is ridiculous. It's my money. Mom, we've been over this. These impulsive purchases are exactly why we set up the protection system. Last month, you wanted to spend $800 on new living room furniture just because you saw it in a catalog. Had I wanted new furniture? Maybe. I couldn't remember every conversation we'd had. I'll transfer an extra 100 to your account, she continued. But I need you to stick to reasonable spending. Dr. Wilson said impulse control can be affected by grief and stress. Dr. Wilson, my family doctor, who'd seen me once since Robert died for a routine checkup. When did you talk to Dr. Wilson about me? I asked him about the normal effects of grief when I was worried about your memory issues. He said it's common for people to have difficulty with decision-making after losing a spouse. That sounded medical enough to be true. And Rebecca was just looking out for me. Right? Wrong. But I didn't know that yet. I bought Tommy a $50 Lego set instead of the bike, watching his face try to hide disappointment when he unwrapped it. Rebecca had stolen my ability to be the generous grandmother I'd always been. But the worst humiliation was yet to come. That happened 2 weeks later when I ran into my old friend Carol at the grocery store. We were chatting by the produce section when she said something that made my blood freeze. Margaret, I'm so sorry about your diagnosis. Rebecca told us at book club. We had no idea you were struggling with early-stage dementia. Dementia. My daughter had told people I had dementia. I don't have dementia. Carol. She looked confused, then embarrassed. Oh, I thought maybe I misunderstood. Rebecca seemed so worried about you living alone. I managed to finish the conversation and get to my car before the full weight of it hit me. Rebecca wasn't just controlling my money, she was destroying my reputation. She was telling people I was mentally incompetent. And suddenly, everything made sense. The pitying looks, the careful way people talked to me, the bank requiring her approval for transactions. My own daughter had convinced everyone I was losing my mind so she could control my life. But why? What did she gain from this elaborate manipulation? I was about to find out, and the answer would make me question everything I thought I knew about the little girl I'd raised. The truth hit me like a freight train when I walked into my accountant's office. I'd made an appointment with Mr. Patterson to discuss some confusion about my monthly statements. Nothing seemed to add up right, and I wanted someone other than Rebecca to explain my finances to me. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Patterson said, looking genuinely confused as he pulled up my files. I'm surprised to see you here. Rebecca told me you didn't want to be involved in financial decisions anymore due to your condition. My condition. There was that word again. What condition exactly did she mention? He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She said the grief from losing Robert had progressed into some cognitive issues. She mentioned you'd been having memory problems and impulse control difficulties. Mr. Patterson, I don't have cognitive issues. Of course not, I didn't mean to. He trailed off, clearly caught between conflicting information. Would you like me to show you your account activity? Yes, please. What he showed me next made my stomach drop to the floor. Over the past 6 months, there had been systematic transfers from my accounts to Rebecca's personal account. Not huge amounts at once, she was too smart for that. But consistent transfers of $10,000 to $15,000 monthly, labeled as household management fees and care coordination costs. She's taken almost $200,000, I whispered, staring at the screen. Mrs. Thompson, these transfers were all authorized. You signed the documents giving her power of attorney for financial matters. I signed papers to add her name for convenience, not to give her power of attorney. Mr. Patterson pulled out a thick file. I have the signed documents right here. He showed me paper after paper with my signature. But as I read through them, I realized what had happened. Rebecca had buried the real authorizations in a stack of routine paperwork, explaining them as standard account updates and beneficiary changes. I'd signed away control of my entire financial life without realizing it. There's more, Mr. Patterson said quietly. She's been shopping for assisted living facilities. She requested financial projections for your care costs through age 85. Assisted living. She was planning to put me in a home. When did she request these projections? 3 months ago. 3 months ago, before the banking restrictions. Before the allowance. She'd been planning to institutionalize me from the beginning. Mr. Patterson, I need copies of everything. Every document, every transfer, every email Rebecca sent you. Mrs. Thompson, I'm not sure I should. It's my money and my life. I have a right to see what's being done in my name. He hesitated, then started printing. You know, I did think some of her requests were unusual, but she's a financial professional, and she seems so concerned about your welfare. My welfare. While she systematically robbed me blind. As I sat there watching page after page of evidence print out, a cold rage started building in my chest. My daughter hadn't just stolen my money, She'd stolen my reputation, my independence, and my relationships with friends and family. But what really pushed me over the edge was the email Mr. Patterson showed me on his screen. One Rebecca had sent just last week. Mr. Patterson, Mom's condition is deteriorating faster than expected. We need to accelerate the timeline for liquidating her assets and securing long-term care. Please prepare papers to sell the house. I think we're looking at full-time supervision within 6 months. She was planning to sell my house. The house Robert and I had bought 37 years ago. The house where I'd raised her, where every room held memories of our family. She wanted to take everything from me and lock me away like some confused old woman who couldn't take care of herself. But here's what Rebecca hadn't counted on. I'm not confused. I'm not incompetent. And I sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. I gathered up every piece of paper Mr. Patterson had printed and walked out of that office with a plan forming in my mind. My daughter wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But she was about to learn that this old woman still had some fight left in her, and I was about to turn her own tactics against her in ways she never saw coming. The war between us was just beginning, and Rebecca had no idea what kind of enemy she'd made. I may be 58, but I'm not stupid. If Rebecca wanted to play chess with my life, I was going to learn the rules and beat her at her own game. First, I needed allies who couldn't be bought or manipulated. I started with Dr. Harold Brennan, a neurologist who'd served with Robert in the Army 20 years ago. Harold had been at Robert's funeral and told me to call if I ever needed anything. Well, I needed something now. "Margaret, it's good to hear from you," he said when I called. "How are you holding up?" "Harold, I need a favor, and it's going to sound strange." I told him everything. The memory concerns, the financial control, Rebecca's claims about my mental state. When I finished, there was a long silence. "That's not strange, Margaret. That's elder abuse, and it's more common than you'd think. I need a complete neurological evaluation. One that can't be questioned. Consider it done. How's tomorrow morning?" The relief in my voice probably gave away how scared I'd been. "Harold, I can't afford to pay you right now. Rebecca controls my—" "Margaret, Robert saved my life in Kosovo. This one's on the house." Dr. Brennan spent 3 hours testing my cognitive function, memory, reasoning ability, and mental acuity. When we finished, he looked almost angry. "Margaret, you're sharper than most people half your age. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and there's absolutely no sign of cognitive decline. Whoever's been spreading rumors about your mental state is either misinformed or lying. Can you document that officially? I'll have a full report ready by tomorrow. And Margaret, get yourself a lawyer." The lawyer part was tricky. Most of my money was tied up, and I didn't want to alert Rebecca by making obvious moves. But I remembered something Robert used to say. Sometimes the best weapons are the ones nobody knows you have. I still had one secret account Rebecca didn't know about. Robert and I had kept $15,000 in a small savings account at a different bank, our just-in-case money. I'd never mentioned it to Rebecca because, honestly, I'd almost forgotten about it myself. That $15,000 was about to buy me back my life. I found Sarah Mitchell, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. When I explained my situation and showed her Mr. Patterson's documents, her expression went from professional to personally offended. "Mrs. Thompson, this is textbook financial exploitation. Your daughter has used emotional manipulation and false medical claims to steal nearly $200,000 from you. Can we prove it? With what you've shown me?" "Absolutely. But I want to build an airtight case. Are you willing to do some detective work?" That's when Sarah explained something I hadn't considered. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. As long as I was part of the conversation, I could legally record it without the other person's knowledge. "But be careful," she warned. "Don't do anything that could be seen as entrapment. Just document the truth." So I started documenting everything. I downloaded a recording app on my phone and began capturing every conversation with Rebecca. I photographed documents when I could. I kept detailed notes of every suspicious comment or controlling behavior. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks was even worse than I'd imagined. Rebecca wasn't just stealing from me. She was actively sabotaging my independence. She'd called my insurance company to switch me to a cheaper plan, more appropriate for my situation. She'd contacted my doctor's office to discuss concerns about Mom's ability to manage her medications. She'd even called the grocery store where I'd shopped for 15 years to ask them to keep an eye on me because I'd been confused lately. She was systematically destroying my ability to function independently, creating the very problems she claimed to be solving. But the recording that sealed her fate came during what I thought was just a normal phone call. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she asked in that careful, professional tone. "I'm fine, Rebecca. I wish you'd stop asking that question like you expect a different answer. I'm just worried about you living alone. Maybe we should start looking at some nice assisted living communities, just to have options." "I don't need assisted living." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. The incident at the bank last week shows you're having trouble managing money responsibly. There was no incident at the bank last week." She was making things up now. "What incident? You tried to withdraw $3,000 in cash and couldn't remember why you needed it." "I never tried to withdraw $3,000. But here she was, creating false memories for me. "Rebecca, that didn't happen." "Mom, we talked about this. Your memory isn't reliable anymore. That's why I need to help you with these decisions." That's when I realized the truly diabolical nature of her plan. She wasn't just stealing my money and spreading lies about my mental health. She was actively trying to make me doubt my own memory and sanity. It's called gaslighting, and my daughter had turned it into an art form. But she'd made one critical error. She'd been so focused on making me doubt myself that she'd never considered I might start documenting everything. Now I had proof, and I was about to use it. The question was, when and where to strike back. Rebecca was having a birthday party in 2 weeks, her 35th. She'd invited the whole family, including all the people she'd been lying to about my condition. A public venue, witnesses, maximum humiliation. Perfect. Rebecca's confidence was her downfall. Success at manipulation had made her sloppy. Over the next week, I watched her make mistake after mistake, each one giving me more ammunition for what I was planning. She started getting careless with her lies, probably because she thought I was too confused to keep track. During a phone call with my sister Janet, she mentioned that I'd been wandering around the neighborhood at night, confused about where I lived. I'd been home every night, something I could prove with my smart doorbell's activity log. When she told my nephew Mark that I'd been calling family members at all hours, repeating the same stories, I pulled up my phone records, showing I'd made exactly 3 family calls that month, all at reasonable times. But the real gift came when I overheard her talking to her husband Mike in my kitchen. I'd gone to use the bathroom and came back to find them having what they thought was a private conversation. "This is taking longer than I expected," Rebecca was saying. "Mom's being more resistant to the assisted living idea." "Are you sure this is the right approach?" Mike asked. "Maybe we should just talk to her honestly about downsizing." "Mike, she's sitting on almost $1 million while living in a house way too big for her. She's not going to just hand over control voluntarily." "But telling people she has dementia—" "I never said dementia. I said she's having memory issues due to grief. It's basically true. Grief does affect memory." "Rebecca, what you're doing, it feels wrong." "What I'm doing is protecting family assets from bad decisions. Mom donated $20,000 to random charities in the 3 months after Dad died. That's not normal behavior. Maybe she was just trying to honor his memory. Maybe she was. But I can't let her throw away our inheritance on emotional impulses. Our inheritance." There it was, the real motive. She wasn't protecting me from anything. She was protecting what she saw as her future money from me. I recorded every word, but what she said next made my blood boil. "The house alone is worth $600,000. Add the savings and Dad's life insurance, and we're talking about enough money to set up the kids' college funds and pay off our mortgage. I can't let her flush that down the drain because she's feeling guilty about Dad's death. My guilt about Robert's death. She was using my grief as a weapon against me." "How much longer do you think this will take?" Mike asked. "The lawyer says we can probably get guardianship within 6 months if I can document enough concerning incidents. Once I have legal control, we can sell the house and move her somewhere appropriate." Guardianship. She was planning to have me declared legally incompetent. What if she fights it? With what? She can barely manage her own checkbook anymore, and her doctor has already noted concerns about her mental state. Dr. Wilson had noted concerns? That was news to me. I waited until they left, then immediately called Dr. Wilson's office. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm glad you called," he said when they put me through. "I've been meaning to follow up after your daughter's visit last week." "Rebecca visited you?" "She was very concerned about your mental state. She mentioned memory problems, confusion, some erratic behavior. She asked if I thought you might be developing dementia." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that grief can certainly affect cognitive function temporarily. but that I'd need to do a proper evaluation to assess any real concerns. Has she not mentioned this to you? No, she hasn't. That's odd. She seemed quite worried. She mentioned you'd been having episodes of confusion and poor judgment. Episodes I'd never had with a doctor who'd barely seen me since Robert died. Dr. Wilson, I've never had episodes of confusion. Would you be willing to put that conversation with Rebecca in writing? There was a pause. Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right? I'm beginning to think it's not. When I hung up, I realized Rebecca had been building her case everywhere, with my bank, my accountant, my doctor, and probably others I didn't even know about. But she'd made one crucial error. She'd been so focused on building her narrative about my incompetence that she'd never considered I might be competent enough to catch her. Now I had recordings of her admitting to financial manipulation, evidence of her lies to medical professionals, and documentation of her real motives. Sarah Mitchell nearly whistled when I played her the recordings. Mrs. Thompson, this is more than enough for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. When do you want to move? At her birthday party. Next Saturday. Public confrontation isn't usually the best legal strategy. Sarah, this isn't just about legal strategy. This is about my daughter destroying my reputation with 50 years' worth of friends and family. I want them all to hear the truth at the same time. It's risky. She could claim you're having a mental episode. Not when I have a neurologist's report, recorded confessions, and documentary evidence. Besides, she's invited everyone I care about to watch her celebrate while she's destroying my life. It seems only fair they should see who she really is. Sarah smiled grimly. You know what? You're right. Let's do this. But we do it smart. The plan we developed was surgical in its precision. Dr. Brennan would be there to present the neurological findings. Detective Maria Santos from the Financial Crimes Unit would be standing by to make arrests if necessary. And I would have copies of every piece of evidence ready to distribute. Rebecca thought she was throwing a birthday party. She was actually hosting her own public execution. And the beautiful part? She was going to pay for it herself. The week before Rebecca's party, I felt like a spy preparing for the mission of a lifetime. Sarah Mitchell and I fine-tuned every detail. Dr. Brennan prepared an official report that would be impossible to dismiss. Detective Santos reviewed all our evidence and confirmed there was enough for multiple charges. But I still needed to play my part perfectly. If Rebecca suspected anything, she might cancel the party or find a way to discredit what we were planning. So I became the confused, dependent mother she believed I was. When she called to check on me, I let my voice sound a little lost. Rebecca, honey, I'm having trouble remembering if I paid the electric bill this month. Don't worry, Mom, I'm handling all your bills now, remember? Oh, that's right, thank you, dear. When she stopped by to check on me, I made sure to seem just scattered enough to confirm her narrative without overdoing it. Mom, you left the stove on again when you made coffee this morning, she said, pointing to a burner I'd deliberately left on low. Did I? Oh my goodness, I don't remember doing that. It's okay. These things happen. Maybe we should think about getting you some help around the house. Maybe you're right. Each conversation was recorded. Each lie was documented. She was so confident in her manipulation that she'd stopped being careful about what she said around me. The best recording came 3 days before the party when she brought me the invitation. I wanted to make sure you felt comfortable coming to my birthday dinner, she said. I know being around lots of people can be overwhelming for you now. I appreciate you thinking of me, I replied meekly. I've asked everyone to be patient if you seem confused or repeat yourself. I explained that you're going through a difficult adjustment period. Adjustment period. Such a nice way to describe what she'd been doing to me. That's very thoughtful. I just want you to know that whatever happens with your living situation, you'll always be taken care of. Family looks out for family. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. I love you, Rebecca. I love you too, Mom. The tragedy was that part was probably true. In her twisted mind, she probably did think she was protecting me and the family. But love doesn't justify theft, and caring doesn't excuse destroying someone's independence. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through the plan, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Dr. Brennan would arrive as a surprise guest. I'd tell Rebecca I'd invited an old friend of her father's. Detective Santos would be in plain clothes, appearing to be just another party guest until the moment we needed her. I'd prepared packets for every family member containing copies of the financial documents, the medical evaluation, and transcripts of the most damning recordings. Sarah had helped me organize everything so the evidence would be undeniable. But the most important thing I'd prepared was my speech. I'd practiced it dozens of times, making sure every word was perfect. Because this wasn't just about exposing Rebecca's crimes. This was about reclaiming my dignity in front of everyone who'd pitied me. Everyone who'd treated me like a fragile, confused old woman for the past 6 months. Saturday morning, I got dressed carefully. Not the frumpy, confused old lady look Rebecca expected, but the sharp, confident woman I'd always been. A navy blue dress suit that Robert always said made me look like I could run a corporation. Professional makeup, hair styled properly. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I'd been before grief and manipulation had made me doubt myself. Rebecca was about to meet that woman for the first time. I arrived at the restaurant early and found Detective Santos already seated at the bar, looking like any other customer enjoying a drink before dinner. Dr. Brennan arrived 20 minutes later, and I introduced him to Rebecca as Harold, one of your father's army buddies. "Oh, how wonderful," Rebecca exclaimed, playing the perfect hostess. "Dad would have loved having you here, if she only knew what Harold was really here for." As the guests arrived, my sister Janet, my nephew Mark, Rebecca's in-laws, family friends I'd known for decades, I watched their careful interactions with me. The gentle voices, the patient smiles, the way they avoided asking me direct questions about anything important. These people genuinely cared about me, which made Rebecca's manipulation even more disgusting. She'd turned their love and concern into weapons against me. But all of that was about to change. When the last guest arrived and everyone had ordered drinks, Rebecca stood up with her wine glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate with me tonight," she began. "This year has been challenging for our family with Dad's passing and Mom's adjustment difficulties. But having all of you here reminds me how important family support is during difficult times. Adjustment difficulties." Even now, she couldn't help herself. "So let's raise a glass to family and to taking care of each other." Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone, except me. I stood up slowly, and the room went quiet. "Before we toast," I said clearly, "I have something I'd like to share with everyone." Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. "Mom, maybe we should—" "No, honey. I think it's time everyone knew the truth about my adjustment difficulties." I reached into my purse and pulled out the first envelope. "This is a complete neurological evaluation performed by Dr. Harold Brennan, who's sitting right there." I nodded toward Harold. "It confirms that I have absolutely no cognitive impairment, no memory problems, and no signs of dementia or mental decline." The room went dead silent. Rebecca's face had gone white. "Mom, what are you—" "I'm exposing the lies you've been telling about me for 6 months." And then I pulled out the second envelope and handed it to Detective Santos. "Officer Santos, I believe you'll find everything you need in there." The look on Rebecca's face when she realized there was a police officer in the room was worth every moment of the humiliation she'd put me through. But I wasn't done, not even close. "6 months ago," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "my daughter began telling people I was mentally unstable." I looked around the room at faces I'd known for years, people who'd been treating me like a fragile, confused old woman because they believed Rebecca's lies. She told Janet I was having memory problems. She told our book club I had early-stage dementia. She told my bank I needed supervision for financial decisions. Rebecca finally found her voice. "Mom, you're having an episode. Please sit down." "An episode?" I smiled coldly. "Like the episode where I supposedly wandered around the neighborhood confused? Janet, would you like to hear the recording where Rebecca admits she made that up?" I pulled out my phone and played the conversation where Rebecca had lied to Janet about my nighttime wandering. Janet's face went from confusion to horror as she heard her niece's voice fabricating stories about me. Or maybe you'd prefer the recording where she admits her real motivation. I played the kitchen conversation where Rebecca talked about protecting our inheritance and planning to get guardianship so she could sell my house. The silence in that room was deafening. "Mom," Rebecca said, her voice shaking, "you're taking things out of context. I was trying to help you." "Help me?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me show everyone how you helped me." I opened my purse and pulled out copies of the financial documents Mr. Patterson had printed for me. "Rebecca has stolen nearly $200,000 from my accounts over the past 6 months. She convinced me to sign papers I thought were routine bank updates, but they actually gave her power of attorney. She then systematically transferred my money to her personal accounts." I handed copies to Janet. To Mark, to Mike's parents, people who'd supported Rebecca's narrative about my incompetence. She put me on a $500 monthly allowance, claiming it was for my own good. She required bank approval for any purchase over a certain amount. She even changed my health insurance to a cheaper plan without telling me. Mike looked like he was going to be sick. Rebecca, is this true? Rebecca's perfect composure was cracking. I was protecting family assets from poor financial decisions. Mom was donating money randomly, making impulsive purchases. I donated money to the same charities I've supported for 20 years, I said firmly. And the only impulsive purchase I made was a $300 bike for Tommy's birthday, which you prevented me from buying by declining my card. Tommy, who was sitting next to his grandmother on Mike's side, looked up confused. Mom said you couldn't afford a nice present because you were having money problems. The truth was spreading through that room like wildfire, and I could see Rebecca realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. But I still had one more bomb to drop. Dr. Wilson, I said, would you like to tell everyone about Rebecca's visit to your office last week? Rebecca's head snapped toward me. How do you know about that? Because unlike what you've been telling everyone, I'm not confused or incompetent. I'm perfectly capable of making phone calls and asking questions. I looked around the room. Rebecca visited my doctor without my knowledge to discuss my alleged mental decline. She described episodes of confusion and poor judgment that never happened. She asked him if he thought I might have dementia. Dr. Brennan stood up. For the record, I've conducted extensive neurological testing on Margaret. Her cognitive function is completely normal for her age. There are no signs of dementia, memory impairment, or mental decline. Who are you? Rebecca demanded. Dr. Harold Brennan, Chief of Neurology at Portland General Hospital, also a 20-year friend of your father's, which is how I know your mother well enough to recognize that the woman you've been describing to people bears no resemblance to the sharp, competent woman sitting in front of us. The walls were closing in on Rebecca, and everyone could see it. Mike stood up slowly. Rebecca, we need to talk, now. Sit down, Mike, she snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. You don't understand the whole situation. Then explain it, Janet said coldly. Explain why you convinced me my sister was losing her mind when she's clearly fine. Explain why you stole $200,000, Mark added. Explain why you lied to doctors and banks and family, Mike's mother said, her voice full of disgust. Rebecca looked around the room at faces that had gone from loving support to cold judgment in the span of 10 minutes. I was protecting the family assets, she said desperately. Mom wasn't thinking clearly after Dad died. She was going to give away our inheritance to random charities and bad investments. Your inheritance? I stood up, and my voice carried 35 years of maternal authority. Rebecca, that money isn't your inheritance. It's my money, to do with as I choose. And I chose to use it to honor your father's memory by supporting causes he cared about. But you were being careless. I was being generous. There's a difference. Detective Santos stepped forward, and suddenly Rebecca noticed her for the first time. Rebecca Martinez, the detective said formally, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, and fraud. The handcuffs clicked into place as Rebecca finally realized the full scope of what was happening. This is insane, she said, looking desperately around the room. Mom, tell them you need my help. Tell them you can't manage on your own. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I'd raised, the woman I'd trusted, the criminal who'd tried to steal my life, and felt something break inside my chest. Rebecca, I said quietly, the only thing I can't manage is how you became someone I don't recognize. As Detective Santos led her toward the exit, Rebecca turned back one more time. Mom, I love you. I was trying to protect you. No, I said. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. And then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of people who finally understood what had really been happening to me. But the real victory wasn't Rebecca's arrest. It was the way my family looked at me now, not with pity or careful concern, but with respect and admiration. I had my life back. Now, I just had to figure out what to do with it. The silence after Detective Santos left with Rebecca felt like the moment after a tornado passes. Everything familiar was still there. But the landscape had completely changed. Mike was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry. I had no idea. None of us did, Janet said, tears in her eyes. Margaret, how did we miss this? How did she fool us all so completely? I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind the weight of what had just happened. She fooled you because she's smart, and because you love me, I said. She used your concern for me as a weapon against me. Mark shook his head. When she told us you were having memory problems, it seemed so reasonable. People do decline after losing a spouse. We thought we were being supportive. You were being supportive. She manipulated your kindness. Tommy, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, climbed into my lap. Grandma, are you really okay? Mom said you were sick. I hugged him tightly. I'm fine, sweetheart. I was never sick. Your mom was confused about some things. Will she go to jail? The question hit me like a physical blow. My grandson was asking if his mother was going to prison because of what I'd done tonight. I don't know, Tommy. That depends on a lot of things. Mike's mother, Patricia, reached across the table and took my hand. Margaret, what can we do? How can we help? You can treat me like you always did before Rebecca started spreading lies. I don't need special care or constant checking up on. I just need my family back. Over the next hour, the story came out piece by piece. How Rebecca had carefully planted seeds of concern with each family member. How she'd used my natural grief responses as evidence of mental decline. How she'd convinced everyone that I needed protection from myself. The most painful revelation came from Mike. She's been planning this for over a year, he admitted. Even before Robert died, she was talking about how you'd probably need help managing money as you got older. She said it was normal planning for aging parents. A year? I felt sick. She was planning to steal from me while my husband was still alive? I thought she was being responsible, looking ahead, making sure you'd be taken care of. Mike buried his face in his hands. God, I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You married someone who turned out to be very different than you thought. Dr. Brennan, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. Margaret, what Rebecca did to you is more common than people realize. Adult children who exploit elderly parents often use exactly these tactics: false medical claims, financial manipulation, social isolation. How did you know to look for it? Janet asked. Because Margaret called me and asked for help instead of accepting what she was being told about herself. Doctor, Brennan said. Too many victims of this kind of abuse never reach out. They start believing the lies about their own incompetence. I thought about how close I'd come to believing those lies myself, how I'd started doubting my own memory and judgment because Rebecca was so convincing, so concerned, so professional in her manipulation. What happens now? Mark asked. Sarah Mitchell, who had been coordinating with Detective Santos, returned to the table. Legally, Mrs. Thompson has several options. There will likely be criminal charges for the financial exploitation. She can also pursue civil litigation to recover the stolen money plus damages. I want the money back, I said firmly. Every penny. But more than that, I want people to know the truth about what she did. The criminal case will be public record, Sarah explained. But Mrs. Thompson, you should know that this is going to be difficult for your whole family. Rebecca will likely hire a lawyer who'll try to paint you as vindictive or unstable. Let them try. I have recordings, medical evaluations, and documentary evidence. The truth isn't open to interpretation. Mike looked up from his hands. What about the kids? How do I explain to them that their mother is a criminal? It was a fair question, and one that broke my heart. Tommy and his sister Emma were innocent victims in this mess. You tell them the truth in age-appropriate ways, I said. You tell them that adults sometimes make very bad choices and that those choices have consequences. But you also tell them that they're not responsible for their mother's actions. Can they still see you? Tommy asked. Will you still be our grandma? Forever and always, I promised. Nothing Rebecca did changes how much I love you kids. As the evening wound down and people started to leave, each family member made a point of apologizing to me personally, not just for believing Rebecca's lies, but for the way they'd treated me, the careful voices, the simplified conversations, the assumption that I couldn't handle normal adult interactions. Janet was the last to leave. Margaret, I keep thinking about all the times I talked to you like you were a child. How condescending I must have sounded. You were trying to be kind to someone you thought was struggling, but I should have seen through it. I've known you for 58 years. I should have recognized that you were the same sharp, capable woman you've always been. Rebecca is very convincing, and grief does change people temporarily. It wasn't unreasonable to think I might be struggling. What she did to you, It's unforgivable. I thought about that as I drove home to my house. My house. That Rebecca would never be able to sell now. Was what Rebecca did unforgivable? She had stolen my money, destroyed my reputation, manipulated my family, and tried to have me declared incompetent so she could control my entire life. But she was also my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and cheered for at soccer games. The woman who had just been arrested was both of those people. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I knew I could survive what she'd done to me. And sometimes, survival is enough. The weeks following Rebecca's arrest felt like waking up from a long, confusing dream. The first surprise came from Detective Santos, who called 3 days after the party. "Mrs. Thompson, we've discovered additional evidence during our investigation of Rebecca's financial activities." "What kind of evidence?" "She had detailed plans for your institutionalization, including research on low-cost nursing homes and projections for liquidating all your assets. She also had correspondence with a lawyer about expediting guardianship proceedings." My blood went cold. "How detailed?" "Very detailed. She had timeline goals, financial projections, even draft documents for selling your house. Mrs. Thompson, she was planning to have you declared incompetent within 3 months." 3 months. I'd been closer to losing everything than I'd realized. "There's more," Detective Santos continued. "We found evidence that she's done this before." "What do you mean?" "Do you remember your neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who moved to assisted living last year?" I did remember. Eleanor Henderson had lived next door for 15 years before suddenly moving to a care facility. Rebecca had mentioned that Eleanor's son was handling things because Eleanor was having difficulties. Rebecca was consulting with Eleanor's son about managing his mother's finances. We found emails between them sharing strategies for, let's call them, protective financial measures. Rebecca hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been advising other people on how to steal from their elderly parents. The second surprise came from an unexpected source, Rebecca herself. Mike brought me a letter she'd written from jail. Her lawyer had probably advised against it, but she'd insisted on sending it. "Margaret," it began. "Not Mom," I noticed. "I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I need you to understand something." I almost threw the letter away without reading further, but curiosity won. "I didn't set out to hurt you. After Dad died, I watched you struggle with loneliness and grief, and I was genuinely worried about your decision-making. The donations to charity, the impulsive purchases, the way you'd forget where you parked, it all seemed like warning signs. When I suggested helping with your finances, I really thought it was temporary. But once I had access to your accounts, I started seeing opportunities to protect the money from what I saw as poor choices. I told myself I was being responsible, that I was thinking long-term about family security. The lying started small. I exaggerated your forgetfulness to justify the financial controls. But then I had to keep expanding the lies to maintain the narrative. Before I knew it, I was telling people you had dementia, restricting your independence, planning to put you in a home. I convinced myself that I was saving you from yourself, that you'd thank me eventually when you realized how much money I'd protected. I see now that what I was really doing was stealing your autonomy, because I thought I knew better than you how to live your life. I was so focused on protecting family assets that I forgot the family included you. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything. I know I've destroyed our relationship and hurt people I love, but I need you to know that every decision I made, I thought I was doing the right thing. I was wrong about everything. Rebecca, I read the letter 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving justification, but it sounded genuine, like she finally understood what she'd done. That didn't make it forgivable, but it made it comprehensible. The third surprise was how quickly my life returned to normal once the truth was out. My bank immediately restored full access to my accounts and removed all the restrictions Rebecca had put in place. Mr. Patterson helped me reorganize my finances and showed me exactly how much money Rebecca had taken, $247,000 when interest and investment losses were calculated. Dr. Wilson wrote a formal letter clearing up any confusion about my mental state and sent copies to everyone who might have been told otherwise. He also implemented new office policies about discussing patients with family members without explicit consent. Friends who had been treating me carefully started calling to make lunch plans and invite me to social events. My book club welcomed me back with genuine enthusiasm, and several members admitted they'd been worried about the stories Rebecca had been telling. But the biggest surprise was how empowered I felt. For 6 months, I'd been made to feel helpless, confused, and dependent. But fighting back had reminded me of strengths I'd forgotten I had. I was sharper now, more confident, more aware of my own capabilities. I decided to use that energy for something positive. I contacted the Oregon Department of Human Services and volunteered to speak at workshops about elder abuse recognition and prevention. My story, they said, was a perfect example of how financial exploitation often starts with family members who claim to be helping. I also worked with Sarah Mitchell to establish a legal fund for elderly people who couldn't afford to fight financial exploitation cases. We called it the Robert Thompson Memorial Justice Fund because my husband would have loved the idea of protecting other families from what Rebecca had done to us. The fund's first case was helping Eleanor Henderson's family investigate what her son had actually done with her money. But the most important change was in my relationship with my grandchildren. Tommy and Emma started spending weekends with me again, court-supervised visits until the legal situation was resolved, but real time together nonetheless. Mike had been honest with them about what their mother had done, and while they didn't fully understand the adult complexities, they grasped that Grandma had been treated unfairly and that Mom had made very bad choices. "Grandma," Emma asked during one visit, "are you mad at Mommy?" "I'm disappointed in the choices she made," I said carefully. "But I'm not mad at you or Tommy. None of this is your fault. Will you ever forgive her?" It was a question I asked myself every day. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. Forgiveness is complicated, but I'll always love you both, no matter what." 3 months after Rebecca's arrest, she pleaded guilty to elder abuse and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years of probation, plus full restitution of the money she'd stolen. The day of her sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched my daughter accept responsibility for destroying my trust, my reputation, and my peace of mind. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up and looked at Rebecca directly. "Your Honor, what my daughter did to me was devastating. She didn't just steal my money, she stole my autonomy, my dignity, and my relationships with people I love. She convinced my family that I was mentally incompetent, and she nearly succeeded in having me institutionalized so she could control my entire life. But she also taught me something important, that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can fight back when someone tries to take away my independence, that my mind is sharp, my judgment is sound, and my life is my own to live. I hope she learns from this experience. I hope she gets the help she needs to understand why she thought stealing from her mother was acceptable. And I hope other families can learn from our story so this doesn't happen to them. Thank you." As I left the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: complete freedom. My money was mine again. My reputation was restored. My family relationships were healing. And my daughter, well, my daughter had consequences to face. For the first time since this nightmare began, that felt like justice. 1 year later, I was planting roses in my garden when Mike's car pulled into the driveway. Tommy and Emma tumbled out, racing toward me with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from kids who haven't seen their grandmother in 2 whole weeks. Life had settled into a comfortable routine, weekends with the grandkids, volunteer work during the week, and slowly rebuilding the trust that Rebecca's actions had damaged. "Grandma, Grandma, Mom wants to see you," Emma announced breathlessly. I looked up at Mike, who was walking more slowly behind the kids. "She's being released next week," he explained. "She asked if you'd be willing to visit her before then." Rebecca had served 13 months of her 18-month sentence, with early release for good behavior. I'd known this day was coming, but I hadn't decided what I wanted to do about it. "Has she been writing to you?" I asked. "Every week. Long letters, mostly about how she's been going to therapy and trying to understand why she did what she did." Mike sat down on my porch steps. "She sounds different, more honest about her mistakes. What does she want from me?" "I think she wants to apologize in person and to try to rebuild some kind of relationship with the kids." I looked at Tommy and Emma, who were now chasing butterflies around my flower beds. They'd adapted remarkably well to their mother's absence, but I knew they missed her. Children love their parents even when those parents make terrible choices. "What do you think I should do?" Mike was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you. You don't owe her anything after what she put you through." That was true. Rebecca had stolen from me, lied about me, and tried to destroy my independence. I had every right to refuse to see her, but I'd spent the past year learning to trust my own judgment again. And my judgment told me that healing sometimes requires facing the people who hurt you. Okay, I said, I'll visit her. The Oregon Women's Correctional Center was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Gray concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the unmistakable institutional smell of disinfectant and despair. Rebecca looked smaller than I remembered. Prison clothes, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She'd lost weight, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. We sat across from each other at a small table in the visiting room, neither of us speaking for several minutes. "Thank you for coming," she finally said. Her voice was quieter than I remembered too. "I'm not sure why I'm here." "I am. You're here because you're a better person than I am." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But she just looked tired and sad and genuinely remorseful. "I've had a lot of time to think," Rebecca continued, "about what I did, why I did it, how I justified it to myself, and I've come to some uncomfortable conclusions. Such as the fact that I never really saw you as a complete person with your own right to make decisions about your life. After Dad died, I started thinking of you as my responsibility instead of my mother." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When you started donating money to charity and buying gifts for people, I saw it as wasteful. I thought I knew better how that money should be used, but what I was really doing was deciding that your values weren't as important as mine. You were stealing from me." "Rebecca, I was. And I was telling myself it wasn't stealing because I was family, because I was protecting assets, because you weren't thinking clearly. But those were all lies I told myself to avoid admitting that I was stealing from my mother." I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head dozens of times, imagining all the angry things I might say. But sitting across from her now, seeing genuine remorse instead of self-justification, I found myself asking a different question. "Why, Rebecca? We raised you to respect other people's autonomy. We taught you that stealing was wrong. How did you convince yourself that what you were doing was acceptable?" She was quiet for a long time. "I think it started with fear," she said finally. "Fear that you'd make financial mistakes and lose everything Dad worked so hard to build. Fear that you'd give away my kids' college funds to charity. Fear that I'd fail in my responsibility to protect the family. But those weren't your decisions to make. I know that now. But at the time, I convinced myself that love justified control, that if I was doing it for good reasons, the methods didn't matter." She looked directly at me for the first time since we'd sat down. "I was wrong, Mom, about everything. You weren't losing your mind. I was losing my moral compass. You weren't making poor decisions. I was making criminal ones. You didn't need protection from yourself. You needed protection from me." The conversation continued for another hour. Rebecca told me about the therapy she'd been attending, the other women she'd met who were in prison for financial crimes against their families, the gradual process of accepting responsibility for choices she'd spent months justifying. "I know you might never forgive me," she said, as our visiting time came to an end. "I know I destroyed something between us that might never be repaired, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did wrong and that I'm committed to never doing anything like it again." "What does that commitment look like?" I asked. "It means I'll never ask you for money, never offer financial advice you don't request, never make decisions about your life without your explicit consent. It means respecting your right to live your life according to your values, even if I disagree with your choices. And if you're concerned about a decision I'm making, then I'll express my concern once, respectfully, and accept whatever you decide." I stood up to leave, still processing everything she'd said. "Mom?" Rebecca called softly. "Do you think, someday, we might be able to have some kind of relationship again?" I turned back to look at my daughter, the woman who'd tried to steal my life, but also the little girl I'd raised and loved for 35 years. "I don't know, Rebecca, but I'm willing to see what happens." 6 months later, Rebecca was living in a supervised halfway house and working at a nonprofit organization that helped people manage debt and avoid financial exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. She'd asked to see Tommy and Emma, and after long discussions with therapists and social workers, we'd arranged supervised visits. The kids were cautious but happy to see their mother, and Rebecca was careful not to overwhelm them with her own needs for forgiveness and reconnection. Our relationship was different now, more formal, more careful, built on explicit boundaries rather than assumed trust. She called me Mrs. Thompson instead of Mom, asked permission before giving advice about anything, and never mentioned money or my financial decisions. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship we'd had before, and it might never be again. But it was honest in a way our previous relationship had never been. I'd learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's possession disguised as caring. And Rebecca had learned that good intentions don't justify bad actions, no matter how much you love someone. The money she'd stolen had been fully repaid, plus interest and penalties. I used part of it to establish college funds for Tommy and Emma, funds that Rebecca would never have access to, but that honored her desire to provide for her children's future. The rest went toward expanding the Robert Thompson Memorial Justice Fund, which had helped over 50 families fight financial exploitation cases in its first year. But the most important thing I'd gained from this experience wasn't money or legal victories or public vindication. It was the knowledge that I could trust myself. For 6 months, Rebecca had convinced me to doubt my own memory, judgment, and competence. She'd made me feel like a burden, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. But I'd fought back. I'd documented the truth, gathered evidence, built a case, and exposed her lies in the most public way possible. I'd saved myself, and now, at 59 years old, I was living the most authentic, empowered life I'd ever known. I volunteered with elderly advocacy groups, traveled to places Robert and I had always planned to visit, and spent money on causes and people I cared about without asking anyone's permission. I was nobody's victim, nobody's burden, nobody's problem to be solved. I was Margaret Thompson, widow, grandmother, advocate, and survivor. And I was exactly who I was meant to be. Standing in my garden that evening, watching the sun set over the house that was truly mine again, I thought about the letter Rebecca had written me from prison, the one where she said she thought she was protecting family assets from my poor decisions. She'd been wrong about my decisions being poor, but she'd been right about protecting family assets. The most valuable asset our family had wasn't money or property or investments. It was the truth. And I'd fought to protect that truth from the person who'd tried to steal it. In the end, that was a battle worth winning. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, subscribe to help us grow and keep these stories alive.